extremely well for our operation. And we have covered a lot of EMS calls where that engine pulls up and they can jump off with that gear. The only thing we have to finish is we're in process of trying to complete that with all the fire apparatus. Right now, the frontline first used vehicles have it. We don't have it for the backup vehicles, so we're working on that. Okay, here comes the meat and potatoes. This is more important for you. I understand EMS and life safety, but I want to talk a little bit about why we exist as a fire department. We are not just here because we're here. We have a system of benchmarking that's done through the Insurance Services Office, which is ISO, this guy right up here, and we're a Class 3. So that is something that is a good thing for us, and I'll explain why. Because the numeric system with ISO, with their classification, goes from 9 is the worst to 1 is the best. So we're not doing bad. Can we do better? Most definitely. How does that affect you? And I'm going to go into how this is broken down so you see a little bit of the details. But for insurance purposes in the business world, each classification carries with it a higher premium as you move up. So if I go from a 1 to a 2, business premiums go up. If I go from a 2 to a 3, so forth and so on. In the residential setting, companies are doing different things now because they're grouping them. They don't see that much of a variation between a Class 1 department and a Class 3 department, so they'll bunch those 3 together, they'll bunch the next 3 together, they'll bunch the next 3 together. It has a major impact, though, on business insurance. And so what we're very sensitive to is we have this Class 3, but it's on a 100-point scale, and our score is like a 70.66. So we are just, like back in school, we're barely a C, okay, to put it in the simplest of terms. So we have to watch that carefully, but it takes a lot of resources in order to do that. It's broken down by fire department services, which is basically grading our department operation for apparatus, training, what we do with maintenance of vehicles, what type of vehicles we have, how big the ladders are, how much hose they have, how much equipment they have. I can go on and on and on. There's this huge rating schedule that goes into this that decides whether or not we are a fully equipped. You look at those vehicles and things like that. Can I reach the tallest building in town? Now with high rises, that's obviously an impossible task. They don't make 10,000-foot ladders, for crying out loud. But that is one of the things why we have to have a 100-foot aerial, which was the bigger of the 2 vehicles, the ladder truck. We have to have that in order to at least reach 100 feet. That's the maximum that you can have for apparatus. Really, there's some 105 and 110 footers in Europe, but pretty much that's it. So we can get full service. But we have to watch that as far as where we place that vehicle in relation to where that building is. And I'm going to show you a map in a little bit of how this all works out. So we get graded on a lot of variables within this, and I'm talking down to the detail of certain tools that are on vehicles. So we have to be very cognizant of how we design a vehicle, what we put into it, what our training levels are. One of the things we don't have is a training tower in Mundelein or even the immediate area. So I have to build props and try to do what I can to try to mirror as much of that as I possibly can, but we actually lose points because we don't have that here. In the meantime, our guys have to be like this building. We pre-plan these buildings, is what it's called. We come in, we walk around, and we have a map of this entire building. I have that electronically in that command vehicle, so I know where my people are when they report if this building is on fire, where they're at. They have to not only be aware of the process of doing that, they have to actually study those and be on top of what the changes are in the community. Now imagine how many buildings we have. Forget single family, we don't do that. But just in the commercial end of things and retail end of things, we are required to train on those on an annual basis in order to make that happen. Now I talked about the hours about EMS of what we have to do on a monthly basis and what we have to go through. Now we add this in. My guys have to go through a minimum of 20 hours of training per month in order for them to get that. Now it doesn't sound like a lot, but when you factor that into our day and what we have to do with calls and everything else, 20 hours a month is a very difficult marker to make. Now add in part-time volunteer firefighters who have to make the same exact grading. There is no delineation between the guys that are here in career operations and the guys that are paid on call or the part-time firefighters. They have to do the same thing as paramedics, as EMTs, as firefighters. There's no changing that, and you can understand why. You know, if you're a paramedic, I don't want to get the part-time paramedic working on me when I'm chest pains. Oh, he only did half the schoolwork. Well, that's great. I'm feeling much, much better now. Give me another IV, you know? So you can see why those standards are out there, and quite honestly, why we're starting to see a decline in the availability of part-time guys. Because they just can't keep up with it anymore. We've lost probably, what, Robin, we've had probably 10 walkouts, I think, since I've got here, which is a ceremony we do for a retiring person. They've all been part-time people. They just can't keep up with it anymore. They're working careers themselves. They have, families that they have to deal with and everything else, and trying to do this is very difficult. So they grade the fire department on all those, and I actually have this whole list here, and I'm not going to go through all the percentages and stuff, but most of this grading process is governed by other standards. The National Fire Protection Association, the American Water Works Association, OSHA, the Illinois Department of Labor. They take all those standards, they bundle them together, and they say, hey, are you guys meeting this stuff on a monthly basis? Okay, we only talked about this part. Let's move to this part, dispatch services. Now they go back and they turn around and they say, okay, when you call 911, how is that system designed? Are there enough trunk lines coming in? Do I have enough dispatchers to handle the calls that are coming in for normal service and the calls that are coming in for emergency services? What type of phone lines do you have coming into that? On and on and on. How much do I have in the way of a redundancy of alerting to the fire stations? One of the things we have to have is we have to have the ability to have, if you've seen, well, I'm afraid to say this now. How many of you remember Squad 51?
Where are you?
No, not Squad, that's Squad, no, the paramedic program that was on Squad 51, emergency?
Yeah, with John Gage. John Gage.
Johnny Gage! I met Johnny Gage, by the way, okay? And Randolph Mantooth. Randolph Mantooth, I actually, he was at one of our EMS dinners. I say that because, gosh, when I say that to the kids that come in the fire service, they're like, what? Emergency? What was that? I'm like, it was like what sparked this whole thing for EMS. But we have to have, if you remember the tones that went out in that show, you hear the we have to have the redundancy of that twice. We have to make sure that if it fails the first time, we have it the second time. Well, per building, that's about a $50,000 thing that I have to do. And we don't have that right now, so we're working toward those types of things where we're trying to put together all the pieces of the puzzle to meet all of these standards to keep ourselves where we need to be. So they come in and evaluate this, and they look at call volume for both police and fire and see what's going on, and our dispatch center is out of our police center. Then water supply. And this is a big one. And of course, I have very little effect on what goes on with public works and a water supply. But they grade hydrants, they grade number of hydrants, they grade distance of hydrants, they grade how much water flow comes out of those hydrants, what the size of the water main is going to them, what the maintenance system is on that. They go through that whole thing and they tear that water system apart. And then they do a really neat thing after all is said and done. After they go through all of this stuff, and I didn't put it on here, there's this thing called divergence. And what they basically do is they say, we want to see how good your fire department is, how good your water supply is, whoops, right there. And do those two, take dispatch out of this, do those two complement each other? And if they don't, we don't like that, we're going to take points away from you. And that's how they grade us. So we have to have a balance between what we do with fire service and what we do with the water supply, so that in the middle the two meet and they're balanced. So if I had 1,000 firefighters in Mundelein and 1 bucket of water, yeah, you'd see this big divergence. You kind of get, just by definition what you have. So this is what creates the fire suppression rating schedule, the FSRS, and that's how we exist. Now there's another key component of this that I haven't talked about, and that's how we disperse our vehicles through this fire department rating. And that's a critical factor for us. Going back, I'll race back, because this is what gets you into the prize thing.
Yeah.
This is a
pumper engine. Hook it up to the house.
This is and so is that one. Okay, they're allowed to only go so far before we lose points. And you're like, huh? Well, that's how this works. When they go through and they look at the fire department services and they say, okay, we have this distribution grid, we look at a map. And not as the crow flies, but linear footage, I'm allowed to take that pumper or that engine 1.5 miles, and then the game's over. I have to repeat that again. So this happens to be Mundelein. It's kind of hard to see the red outline, but I think you can kind of see it there, of the community. That happens to be the engine coverage out of Station 1. Now I have to have that engine staffed. So if I have that engine staffed and then they go, okay, well you have a ladder truck at Station 1, we want to grade that, I go, I don't have that staffed. And that's not uncommon in the northwest suburbs. I don't want to exaggerate things and say, whoa, it's me, the sky's falling and everything else. But that will take points away, and that's a very common thing. We usually jump people between vehicles in a suburban setting. It's not an uncommon thing. So I get 1.5 miles for an engine.